Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on the Odyssey. So this is the small series, The Real Odyssey, where I analyze every single one of the 12 trials of Odysseus on his way back home. This video here is the trial of cunning and ego. The trial of cunning and ego. A better, longer description of it could be the trial of cunning versus brute force, and ultimately the trial of ego, which is kind of tacked on at the end of that trial. So, again, in normal fashion, I'm going to describe the previous videos, keep these short to the point. I'm going to have a small synopsis, and then the symbolism and the interpretation behind it. A lot of these, I think, are pretty easy and pretty logical for you to come up with your own conclusions and understandings and analysis yourself. And following the previous videos, as you'll see, that most of this is just based in plain logic. You don't have to go too far into reading too much between the lines to figure out what half of these things are. Like, they're pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. This is also something that I needed to point out, because there are people that are saying, oh, you know, the story of the Odyssey has been changed so much by the bards over the years and all that shit. No, the essence has been kept the same, and it's the same story. Now, what details have been changed a little bit here, a little bit there, to accentuate and to emphasize a little bit more of the story of the trials, and to perhaps better present it even more. It's adding to the entire cohesiveness of this tale. And if anything, just like we in Hellas ourselves, a lot of analysts have added more onto this tale with interpretations and translations and so on and so forth. They've done the exact same thing back in the day. And basically, you'll see that the interpretation of the symbolism is so simple that I could personally retell this story in 10 different ways, and it will be the same thing. I could change little details here, change little details there, and it's the same thing. So when they talk about certain consistency, yes, there may be certain variances and certain differences over the many years of this, because it was passed on, you know, from word of mouth as poems. There are many parts to it that could have been, you know, interpreted slightly differently over time, and so it changed. But if I'm telling you that, okay, this is a trial of Odysseus versus the Cyclops, Polyphemos, who basically, you know, it just shows us that wit and cunning, how we can use wit and cunning to overpower brute force. And at the end of that, it's also kind of a lesson with regards to keeping our ego in check. Just knowing those things, you can interpret it a little bit like this, a little bit like that, and you know what the story is for the most part. It's under the sheep, it's this, okay. Now if you change one detail here, one detail there, you're keeping in line the exact same story. That's why I completely refuse the stupidity that I hear, that, oh, it's just fiction. It's not just fiction. First of all, it's mythology, it's symbolism. Mythology is much deeper than just, you know, fiction, because a lot of mythology is part of actual history itself as well. There's historical events, historical figures and whatnot. They have certain symbolisms and certain lessons that they're trying to teach, ethical lessons, spiritual lessons, or whatever else they may be. And we need to keep those symbolisms intact. You can't just change those things around and start making up whatever the hell you want, which means that the core of all the information has remained the same. I mean, how hard is it to pretty much figure out what this trial is about? I'm going to read right into it right now, and you tell me with your own logic again, because like I said in previous videos as well, you don't have to take what I say, and I implore you not to take what I say as at face value. Not just what I say, but what everybody says, and always take it with a grain of salt, and always check it, and, you know, try to analyze it. So do that, analyze it, and tell me how these things all line up with regards to all the previous videos or not. I think at this point it's time to pretty much become obvious, the more I'm going into these videos, that there's a through line, that there is a reoccurring kind of motif here with regards to how the story actually develops. It is showing a certain progression, it is showing certain temptation, it is showing certain humane characteristics of pitfalls and things that we need to, you know, learn, and trials that we need to take in order for us to ascend and become better beings. Now, how perfect the tale is or isn't is a completely different, you know, is of a different nature. It could be very primitive to a certain degree and be describing and explaining certain, you know, simple things. It's hilarious though, to a certain degree, that most of these even simple things, most of our today modern world doesn't even understand, even though they're so simple. Food for thought. So basically, Odysseus and his men land on the island of the Cyclops. Basically, he's one of the lesser Cyclops. He's one of the smaller Cyclops. He's a son of Poseidon, I think. And I think, if I recall, this gets here a little bit more just, you know, the eye. There's two symbolisms. The older Cyclops, which those are like from the Titans and the other legends, where They are builders, and the single eye represents the focus and the undivided focus on the task and being true to to striking to the point. Whereas this symbolism of this lesser Cyclops, the one eye, shows that they are the narrow-minded kind of perspective, and he's more of a destructive force. Okay, so that's these kind of Cyclops. There's different types, and they're not as big, they're not as much the giant kind of titans of the more ancient kind of Cyclops. So there's different categories of Cyclops as well. So this is Polyphemus, and he is a son, if I recall, he's a child of Poseidon. So they enter the cave, and he starts to, trap them inside and begins to eat them one by one. Odysseus gets Cyclops drunk with wine and talks to him. He tells him, hey, I'm nobody. He pretty much, uses his wit in this entire kind of confrontation to blind his single eye, and then use the ship, the story where all the men are underneath the ship, tied underneath the ship, and then they use the ship to go out of the cave, so he doesn't know where they are, and they escape. Okay, so that's pretty much the trial, for the most part. At the end of all this, as he's sailing away, he calls out, it was me, Odysseus, that outsmarted you, revealing his true name, which of course later brings the wrath of Poseidon upon him. So let's have a look at a little bit the analysis here. First of all, Polyphemus is pretty much the single-minded, narrow-minded side of ourselves, destroying all our aspects inside us. Again, it's an internal kind of battle in this situation, and the Cyclops being also the brute force, but I will also argue the narrow-minded perception. This entire side of their experience, I would argue, is part, again, of a psychological state of that monster, that narrow-minded, kind of primitive and vile kind of side of us. It's as if the conflict within us, as we keep heading on home, kind of increases and takes a bigger form, and starts to now our own nature, our own body is starting to fight against us and against our journey and try to eat us apart. And again, it comes down a little bit to temptations and so on and so forth. At this point, it kind of symbolizes, I would argue, also the self that reaches a point where it kind of has more of an outright conflict with us, as if we're actually really fighting our demons, and it's trying to eat us apart. Now, again, of course, the symbolism shows, and that's one of the greatest parts, and everybody refers to this part, that the brute force is no match for clever intelligence, and that clever intelligence is used to overcome brute force. Polyphemus also embodies the uncivilized, arrogant kind of side of us. So again, it's part of that self where we're trying to get rid of our arrogance, and we're trying to get rid of our uncivilized kind of self. It's really as if we're fighting against our baser kind of animalistic kind of side to ourselves, which again, it is a core theme from the previous ones, from the previous two trials, but as you can see, it kind of escalates and it changes slowly. It takes different forms every time. In this situation here, again, which goes back to what I was saying before, you'll see there's a through line in all of this. In this situation here, we'll also kind of see the juxtaposition of intellect versus brute force, and ultimately also the last part of this, which is the ego.
I am Odysseus! Oh! Ah!
His prideful taunt at the end, revealing his name, shows the danger of unchecked ego, a mistake that will cost him dearly for the rest of the journey. So again, it shows us that it teaches of humbleness, I would say, and I would argue, and keeping your ego in check. And that is another thing, again, for those of you that might have noticed that in real life experiences, in a lot of cases, in a lot of situations, our ego is our worst enemy a lot of times. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but again, it depends on how observant certain people are with regards to events that happen in their life. But when we boast and we gloat about something, it usually comes around to bite us in the ass. Those energies, they're trying to teach you something. Pay attention to that stuff that happens in your life and try to see why that happened. That's pretty much what this entire trial is trying to show us. It's trying to teach that, you know what, don't be so boastful and so arrogant. Keep your ego in check. And ego is our worst enemy, and it is our downfall ultimately. And doing things for ego is also for the wrong reason. Even for returning to the light, if you do it through ego and for the reasons of ego, you pretty much will never get there. And that's kind of symbolized here as well to a certain degree. Ego is not the path of the righteous, it's not the path of enlightenment and transcendence. If anything, it breaks and it destroys what you create and throws you back down. So again, these are pretty straightforward, I would argue, to a certain degree. Pretty straightforward stories. honestly, at this point. You'll notice that that's why they're small, short videos. And once you connect them with the first two videos that I made, again, the trial of the Axis and the whole entire story of who Penelope and who Odysseus and the whole story of Odysseus and what it's about, once you put all this together, I think that, again, once more, these all connect with each other and still, like pieces of a puzzle, form a single coherent image. And that's why I implore people to, again, not take any of this for face value and just have it as food for thought. And be like, well, there are different interpretations out there. Let's check this interpretation out. And what's this interpretation doing? And use your own logic. And again, this is, I guess, to a certain degree, an exercise of thought, of free thinking, and being able to use logic and understand symbolism, which, again, this is nothing really amazing or really hard to actually figure out. I would argue that the hardest symbolic part of all of this story are the two first videos that I already made, which are pretty large. That's where most of the symbolism resides. Here we have much simpler, straightforward symbolism, but I think that slowly the pattern is kind of like fulfilling itself, and it's all adding to a larger puzzle as it builds up towards the the final climactic finish to the tale of the Odyssey. So that's it for this video. Again, keeping these short, and I hope you enjoyed this one as well. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, peace be with you. You don't have to really, what in the actual fuck is that? Freaking locust of Egypt. Jesus Christ, man. I can hear that shit. It's like a... Damn. Anyway, like I was saying. And ultimately, locust no more.